The regular season is over now, which means it's time for my end of season quarterback tier list. I do want to quickly mention that there are several noteworthy quarterbacks like Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott, and Daniel Jones, just to name a few, that won't be on this tier list because they've either hardly played or haven't played at all since my mid-season tier list. So for example, Trevor Lawrence has only started one game since then, and it was when Aziz Al-Perfect tried to kill him live on TV. So there really isn't anything new to say about those guys. With that out of the way, let's just get right to it. Just like all my other tier lists, we're going to be going in alphabetical order by team, which means we're starting with Arizona's Kyler Murray. And I feel like it's just been more of the same with Kyler Murray. I think we know who he is at this point. He's an average to slightly above average quarterback, and I have my doubts he's ever going to be more than that. I think he's the textbook definition of a B-tier quarterback. That just suits him perfectly. Now, Kirk Cousins is an interesting one because back when I made my mid-season tier list, he had 17 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. I had him in A tier because he was having a solid season up until that point. But right after that video, he just completely fell off a cliff, throwing 1 touchdown to 9 interceptions before getting benched. I just don't know what to do with him. Does the good and the bad balance out to about a C tier? Or was he so atrocious at the end of the year that I have to drop him all the way down to D? I'm not going to overreact too much, so I'm still going to put him in C tier, but he's definitely on the lower end. Now for Michael Penix, and we have a very small sample size here, but overall I liked what I saw from him. He wasn't perfect, of course, but that's to be expected for a rookie in his first couple starts. And he was very clutch in that Washington game. Because we've hardly seen him play, I can't really put him much higher than C tier, but he's definitely above Kirk Cousins. Now for Lamar Jackson, and there's really not a lot to say here. He's been the best quarterback in the league this season, and I think he's the deserving MVP winner. It's really close between him and Joe Burrow. They both have 45 total touchdowns after all, but I just have to go with Lamar. Now for Josh Allen, and in my opinion he's not on the same level as guys like Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow are this season, but I mean come on, this is Josh Allen we're talking about, he's going in S tier. Now for Bryce Young, and this is a really interesting one to talk about, because he was truly horrific to begin the year, then he got benched, and ever since coming off the bench he's actually been pretty decent. I think if we were just talking about the second half of the season, I'd be putting him up in B tier. But the good and the bad balances out to about a C. Now for Caleb Williams, and he really wasn't that bad statistically, but man was it painful to watch whenever I did watch him play. Granted, I'm pretty sure the only 2 full games I watched him play were the Texans game and the Seahawks game, so yeah. I'm sure it wasn't all that bad, but I still don't feel like I can put him any higher than C tier. In fact, I'm gonna keep Bryce Young above him. Something I never thought I'd be saying. Now for Joe Burrow, and this is one of the biggest carry jobs I think I've ever seen. He's going right up to S tier. Honestly, I think it would be perfect if he's co-MVP with Lamar Jackson, because they both deserve it. Now for famous Jameis, and boy did we see some vintage Jameis Winston performances. He is who he is. I think I've got to put him in D tier, but he's definitely at the higher end of D tier. He's too turnover prone to rely on, but he is capable of having big performances, as we saw against Denver. Now for Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who only started 2 games, but as much as I hate to tear someone down, he was so spectacularly awful that I had to include him on the tier list. In just 2 games, he had a completion percentage barely above 50, along with 0 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, with 3 fumbles for good measure. That is truly legendary, and I've got to give him F tier for that. Now for Cooper Rush, who was surprisingly decent with the Cowboys in the second half of the year, throwing for 12 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, although he did have 9 fumbles. I feel like Cooper Rush is very much in that Ryan Fitzpatrick tier, where you can throw him in and he'll play well, but if he's your full-time starting quarterback, you're cooked. I think he fits comfortably in C tier right behind Caleb Williams. Now for Bo Nix, who's having a really good rookie year. I feel like it would surprise a lot of people to hear that he has more touchdown passes than Josh Allen. It may seem a little high to some, but 34 total touchdowns as a rookie is nothing to sneeze at. I'm putting him right in A tier. Especially once you consider how bad his first 2 games were, the way he's bounced back for the rest of the season is really impressive. Now for Jared Goff, and I would put him in S tier, but this bum doesn't even have 40 touchdowns, so I gotta drop him a tier. And all jokes aside, of course he's going in S tier. He's been playing lights out this season outside of one truly horrific performance against Houston. What I think is really impressive about Jared Goff is that when I made my mid-season tier list, he had 14 touchdown passes, and now he has 37. So as the Lions' defense fell apart to injuries, he went and threw 23 touchdown passes in the second half of the season alone. Pretty good if you ask me. Now for Jordan Love, and after tossing picks left and right to start the year, he's actually only thrown 1 interception since my last tier list. He's been pretty safe with the football, which is nice to see because that's really his biggest flaw. His counting stats aren't that crazy, and while I know he missed a couple games with injury, he only has 3,300 passing yards, so I'm debating if that's enough to get him into A tier. I think I will ultimately put him in B tier, but he's at the very top of B tier, right on the cusp of A. If he didn't miss 2 games, he probably would be in A tier. Now for CJ Stroud, and man, the sophomore slump for CJ Stroud is pretty brutal. I know it's probably not fair to pick one of his worst games to go off of, but watching that Ravens game, seeing him miss wide open receivers left and right, it was not pretty. I think I've got to put him in C tier, to be honest with you. Now Anthony Richardson, as much as I hate to do it, I've still got to put him in F tier. That's where I had him in my mid-season tier list, and I got to put him there again. Single-digit touchdown passes and a completion percentage below 50, yeah, that's F tier material. That's Tim Tebow territory. Next up is good old McCorkle Jones. And I feel like he could be worse, but he's still gotta go in F tier. He hasn't been as terrible in recent weeks, at least as far as I know, but he's still not good. Somehow I put Joe Flacco in the wrong spot, but I'm just gonna drop him in the lower end of D tier. He's played about how you'd expect him to play. Touchdowns aplenty and interceptions aplenty. Very much like Jameis Winston in that sense. And now for everybody's favorite, Patrick Mahomes. And after a rough start to the year, I feel like it'd surprise a lot of people to hear that he has 26 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. Not crazy good numbers, and certainly not the numbers of the MVP Mahomes we've grown accustomed to, but certainly not bad. I think he's deserving of a high A tier. Now we've got Aiden O'Connell, who hasn't been that bad since taking over in Las Vegas, but he's still nothing special. I'm debating between C and D tier, but beating the Jaguars and the Saints is nothing to write home about. He's definitely above Jameis and Joe Flacco, but he's still gonna go at the upper end of D tier for now. Next up is Justin Herbert, and after being a low-volume, high-efficiency quarterback for most of the year, he's really turned it on in the last couple weeks. 23 touchdown passes isn't a crazy total, but when you pair that with just 3 interceptions, that's a very good season. I think I'm going to place him in A tier just below Patrick Mahomes. Now for Matthew Stafford, and you could use a lack of receivers as an excuse for his mediocre stats earlier in the year, but now that he has Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp back, he's kind of been disappointing. He's still been good, and he's only thrown 2 interceptions since my last tier list, but I feel like he should be putting up better numbers with that much talent around him. I think B tier is where he belongs, but comfortably below Jordan Love. Now for Tua, and it's kind of been the same story with him. He missed games with injuries, and he's put up great stats when he's been on the field. And yet for whatever reason, he's still just not that impressive. I can't really think of a Dolphins win that was actually noteworthy. They played really well in a loss to Buffalo, and that's pretty much all I can think of when it comes to good performances against good teams. I think I'll give him a high B tier, but once again, comfortably behind Jordan Love. Now for Sam Darnold, and the first half of the season was not a fluke. The Sam Darnold comeback story is still going strong. 35 touchdowns to 12 picks is not game manager numbers. I think he's legit. I'm comfortably putting him at the top of A tier, even above Patrick Mahomes. Now for Drake May, and I've been really impressed with him. The numbers aren't anything crazy, but when you consider how terrible his supporting cast is, some of the plays he's able to make are really impressive. I think it's safe to say New England has found a guy to build around. I can't really put him too high, but I'm gonna put him right at the top of C tier, and I expect him to go upwards next season. Now for Derek Carr, and in limited playing time, he's been pretty good this season. Of course, he missed a lot of time with injuries, so I gotta dock him some points for that, but he's played well enough to earn a low B tier. Now Spencer Rattler is tough to evaluate, because I don't think he's nearly as bad as his 0-6 record would indicate. I mean, I saw the Saints lose by double digits to the Raiders, and I was like, what the hell? How did that happen? I pulled up the game stats, and once I saw the Saints receivers, I was just sitting there like, who the hell are these people? Like, genuinely, who does Spencer Rattler have to throw the ball to? I don't think he's gotten a fair shake, and because of that, I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt and put him at the lower end of D tier. Now for Drew Lock, and he absolutely went off against the Colts, and outside of that, he's been terrible. I can't really let one outlier game sway my opinion much, so I'm gonna keep him in F tier. Now for Aaron Rodgers, and it's been a really weird season for him. Because if you look at his counting stats, you'll think, oh, he's been really good this season, but whenever I've watched him play, I've come away unimpressed. Aaron Rodgers just hasn't seemed to come through when they need him. I'm tempted to put him in C tier despite the very good stats, and honestly I think I will. He just hasn't really impressed me. Now for Jalen Hurts, and this is another weird statistical season for a different reason than Aaron Rodgers. He's only thrown 18 passing touchdowns, but he has 14 rushing touchdowns, so really he has over 30 total touchdowns, which is very good. But then he also doesn't even have 3,000 passing yards. I know he missed 2 games, but still, that's crazy for a high-tier starting quarterback. Jalen Hurts barely even has 3,500 total yards, rushing and passing combined. So I feel like he deserves A tier, but that also feels a little high for those numbers. Still, he's been relatively safe with the football, and 32 total touchdowns speaks for itself. I'm going to put him on the lower end of A tier. Now for Russell Wilson, and he's had a decent statistical season, although he's struggled against good teams. And unfortunately for the Steelers, there were plenty of good teams on their schedule. He doesn't have crazy counting stats since Justin Fields played for the first chunk of the year, but he still looked pretty good. He's very similar to Derek Carr, I feel, so I'm going to put him just a tad above him. Now for Brock Purdy, and he's had a very underwhelming season. He did miss a couple games, but 20 touchdowns to 12 interceptions is not what I'd expect from him. Although, interestingly, he does have 5 rushing touchdowns on the year. All in all, I think he still deserves B tier, but I'm actually going to put him below Russell Wilson. Now for Geno Smith, and his season's been a bit frustrating as a Seahawks fan. His completion percentage is over 70, very good. He's thrown for over 4,300 passing yards, very good. He's thrown for 21 touchdowns, which isn't crazy, but those are okay numbers. But none of that gets talked about because his terrible interceptions, especially in the red zone. I feel like some of that can be blamed on Ryan Grubb because I do feel like he took a noticeable step back compared to the last few years. But I can't really put him much higher than the middle of B tier. Now for Baker Mayfield, and he has been phenomenal. He's turned the ball over a little bit more than you'd like, but still, 41 touchdown passes? Remember a year or 2 ago when everyone gave up on him and thought he sucked? Can you imagine telling them he'd throw 41 touchdown passes? I put him in S tier in my mid-season tier list, and I think he has once again earned that distinction. Now for Mason Rudolph, who only started 2 games since my last tier list, but I decided to include him anyways because I thought it was interesting that in my last tier list he had 4 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, and in just 2 more starts, he tacked on 5 more touchdowns and 5 more interceptions. Hey, at least he's consistent. I'm still going to put him in F tier though. Now Will Levis is interesting because obviously he started the year off terrible and he was a living meme. But then around the middle of the year, he started to look like he was turning things around. But unfortunately, he didn't look so hot near the end of the year. I think he's done enough to push himself out of F tier, but I'm going to put him below Aiden O'Connell. And finally, we have Jaden Daniels. And he has been phenomenal as a rookie. The Commanders found themselves a stud, and there's finally something for Washington fans to be excited about. He's definitely deserving of A tier. My only question is if I put him above or below Sam Darnold. And no shade to Darnold, but I feel like I would fear playing Jaden Daniels more. So I'm going to put him right at the top of A tier. And there we have it. There's my complete tier list. I'm sure everyone agrees with me, and we will all be civil and respectful people in the comments section, right guys? Anyways, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this tier list, remember to like and subscribe.